the pervasive scent of a world where people seldom wash, is the first thing you notice. Your nose crinkles involuntarily, yet you are already acclimatizing to it, a testament to the human body's adaptability. You are here to find that nearly everything taken for granted in contemporary life has yet to be conceived. The revelation that may strike you, however, is that the individuals around you are not despairing. They are simply immersed in the only existence they have ever known. Your bed is a rudimentary wooden frame, interwoven with ropes that support a slender mattress filled with straw or corn husks. The ropes have slackened during the night, creating a significant dip in the center. Through the rough fabric, you can distinguish every individual piece of straw prodding your back, which now aches in ways you never thought possible. This is the nature of slumber here. Everyone rises with a degree of soreness. The chamber around you is shrouded in dimness, illuminated solely by the slivers of sunlight that penetrate the small windows. These apertures lack glass, a commodity that costs more than a year's wages for most. In its place are wooden shutters, which can be secured against rain and cold at the expense of light. Some households stretch oiled paper or cloth over the openings, admitting a murky glow that renders the outside world cloudy and surreal. A rumble from your stomach signals hunger, which is a positive sign. It confirms you are not among the numerous colonists who retire for the night on an empty stomach, but it also heralds the beginning of the day. Procuring food in colonial America is an enterprise that consumes the entire day, commencing well before the sun appears. The house begins to stir. You discern the soft padding of bare feet on wooden floors and the groaning of floorboards that have settled over decades. Someone is already active, likely the lady of the house, whose day starts earliest. She must rekindle the fire, which has dwindled to embers overnight. Without it, there is no means to cook, heat water, or provide warmth. As you swing your legs from the bed, your feet meet the floor with a jolt. It is merely packed earth, as hard as rock and as frigid as winter. While more affluent families might have wooden floors, the majority reside on earthen surfaces, pounded until smooth and solid. It is remarkably functional, easy to sweep, and costs nothing to create. Yet, it is perpetually cold, and during heavy rains, moisture sometimes permeates from the ground below. The cold envelops your body like a physical blow. Central heating is, of course, non-existent, and the fire that offered a meager warmth the previous evening has subsided to glowing coals. You can see your own breath materializing in the air. In the morning, everyone's exhalation forms small clouds of vapor, even during the summer. In winter, it is common to awaken to frost glazing the inside of the windows and a layer of ice in the water buckets. You are attired in the same garments you wore yesterday, and the day prior, and the one before that. This is not a matter of laziness or uncleanliness. It reflects the reality that most people in colonial America possess only a single set of daily attire, perhaps two if they are fortunate. There is one ensemble for everyday labor and another reserved for church on Sundays. The fabric is coarse and abrasive against your skin, typically homespun wool or rough linen, stitched by hand with thick, irregular threads designed for years of arduous use. Your clothing carries the aroma of wood smoke, perspiration, and the general essence of human existence. But this is true for everyone, so it goes unnoticed. It is one of the peculiar aspects of living in an era when everyone shares a similar scent. Your nose ceases to perceive it as unusual, treating it as ambient noise, much like the sound of traffic in a modern metropolis. Approaching the window, you unlatch the wooden shutters and gaze outside. The sun is just beginning its ascent, casting a soft, golden radiance that momentarily beautifies even the most challenging existence. You see other houses dotted across the landscape, most of them resembling your own. Small wooden structures with steep roofs and diminutive windows. Some are constructed using a method known as wattle and daub, where slender wooden lathes are woven together like a basket, and then coated with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung that cures into surprisingly resilient walls. The terrain appears different from your expectations. Tree stumps are everywhere, massive remnants indicating where colossal trees once stood. Clearing land for agriculture is backbreaking labor that spans years, and colonists often fell trees and leave the stumps to decay rather than undertake the monumental effort required to extract them. The fields between the stumps are planted with corn, wheat, or other crops intended to sustain everyone through the winter. Smoke ascends from chimneys all around, a sign that everyone is beginning their day in the same manner, by kindling the fire. In colonial America, fire is life itself. Without it, one cannot cook, heat water, stay warm, or have light after sunset. Safely maintaining a fire is a skill that can determine the difference between life and death, particularly in the winter. Air is filled with the clucking of chickens and the crowing of roosters. Nearly every family raises chickens, as eggs and the occasional fowl are vital sources of protein. You might also hear the lowing of a cow or the snorting of pigs. Animals are not pets here. They are walking larders, kept close to the house for protection against predators and thieves. Your stomach protests again, this time more insistently. It is time to consider breakfast, although that term feels generous for what you are about to consume. Most colonial families begin their day with a dish called mush, a simple porridge of cornmeal and water, perhaps enriched with a little milk if the cow is obliging. If you are lucky, a bit of molasses or honey might be available for sweetening. But sugar is an exorbitant luxury that most families seldom taste. The woman of the house is already in the kitchen area, which is not a distinct room, but one end of the primary living space, dominated by a large fireplace. She is coaxing the fire back to life, feeding small sticks and kindling to the embers she preserved overnight. This is a skilled task. If the fire extinguishes completely, she would have to visit a neighbor to borrow live coals, as matches are still a century from invention. You hear the scrape of metal on metal as she positions an iron pot over the flames. Every aspect of cooking here is heavy, hot, and perilous. The pots are made of thick iron, weighing more than you can fathom. The fire emits sparks and unpredictable waves of heat. Burns are exceedingly common, and a severe one could easily be fatal in the absence of antibiotics or modern medical care. Water for the mush must be transported from a well, a stream, or a rain barrel. There are no faucets, pipes, or any form of indoor plumbing. Every drop of water utilized in the household is carried in by hand, one bucket at a time, which fosters a profound consciousness of water consumption. Washing dishes involves heating water over the fire and using it as sparingly as possible. As the cornmeal porridge cooks, its aroma begins to permeate the house. It is not an unpleasant scent, earthy, warm, and substantial. Your mouth begins to water as your body recognizes that this simple fare must provide fuel for a day of strenuous physical labor. In colonial America, idleness does not exist. Everyone, including children, works from sunrise to sunset simply to keep the family fed and alive. While the food cooks, you might hear another family member commencing their morning chores. Perhaps the sharp crack of an axe splitting wood for the fire, or the squeak of a door as someone ventures out to check on the livestock. Even young children are assigned duties, such as feeding chickens, collecting eggs, carrying water, or sweeping floors. There is a perpetual cycle of work, and every person's contribution is indispensable for survival. The modest house around you is the product of an immense amount of toil. Each piece of wood was felled and shaped by hand. Every nail was forged individually by a blacksmith. The windows, if they contain actual glass, cost more than most people earn in months. Nothing here is mass-produced or sourced from a store. Nearly everything is created by the family or acquired through trade with neighbors. You are beginning to grasp something that modern people often overlook: the sheer effort required simply to exist in earlier times. Staying fed, warm, dry, and healthy were not guaranteed states, but daily challenges demanding constant vigilance and hard work. Yet there is a certain beauty in this. The people around you possess skills that most modern individuals have never acquired. They can construct a house, cultivate food, preserve meat, fashion clothing, treat illnesses with herbs, and create functional tools from raw materials. Their self-sufficiency and resourcefulness are astonishing. The porridge is now ready. The woman of the house ladles it into wooden bowls. There are no plates as you know them. Most families eat from wooden trenchers, which are thick boards with hollows carved into them. Spoons are available, but forks are a rarity, and knives are used primarily for cutting rather than for eating. Most people use their hands or pieces of bread to scoop their food. The mush is hot and filling, though not particularly flavorful. Salt is absent unless the family can afford to purchase it, and seasonings are limited to whatever herbs can be grown locally. However, when you are hungry and facing a day of intense labor, even plain food tastes delicious. Your body craves the calories and carbohydrates that will supply energy for the physical demands ahead. As you eat, your thoughts turn to the day's tasks. If you are fortunate enough to live on a farm, as most colonists do, your day will be dictated by the seasonal requirements of agriculture. In spring, this means plowing fields or planting crops. Summer is dedicated to weeding and tending to the growing plants. Autumn involves harvesting and preserving food for the winter. Winter is a time for maintaining tools, spinning thread, making clothes, and endeavoring to stay warm. The rhythm of life here is governed by the seasons and the sun. You retire when darkness falls because candles are costly and firelight is dim. You rise with the sun because there is no sense in lingering in bed when there is work to be done. Your schedule is determined by the weather, the crops, and the animals, not by clocks or calendars. Outside, you can hear other families beginning their days. Children's voices as they perform their morning chores, the thud of an axe biting into wood, the creak of a well rope as water is drawn, the sounds of a cow being milked. These are the sounds of a community where survival depends on mutual reliance. Survival is indeed the operative word. You are in a time when a poor harvest signifies hunger, a harsh winter means death, and a simple injury can become infected and fatal. There are no hospitals, grocery stores, or government programs to intervene when things go wrong. Families and communities must care for themselves and for one another. Yet there's also something profoundly gratifying about this life, despite its hardships. When you grow your own food, build your own shelter, and make your own clothes, you forge a connection to the basic necessities of life that most modern people never experience. You know precisely where your food originates and the immense labor required to produce it. You comprehend the value of simple things, like a warm fire or a dry roof over your head. The porridge is finished, and it is time to commence the day's real work. Your body feels heavy and warm with sustenance, prepared for the physical challenges that await. The fire burns steadily and brightly, promising warmth and the means to cook dinner later. The sun climbs higher, bringing light and the prospect of another day survived in this demanding, but ultimately rewarding world. You are about to step into a day that will test your strength, skills, and endurance. But you are also about to experience the deep satisfaction that comes from using your hands and your back to create something of value, to contribute to your family's survival, and to be part of a community where everyone's work is essential. Stepping outside into the crisp morning air, the first thing you notice is how profoundly different this world smells from what you might anticipate. There is the clean aroma of wood smoke, certainly, but beneath it lies something earthier, more pungent. It is the odor of a world without modern sanitation, where humans and animals coexist in much closer proximity than you are accustomed to, and where the concept of bathing is nearly foreign. The dwelling you just exited represents months of grueling labor. Every piece of timber was cut by hand, using saws that required constant sharpening. walls were constructed with a technique that would seem almost impossible today. First, the men of the community would assemble to raise a wooden frame, massive beams of oak or pine shaped with hand tools and joined with wooden pegs and meticulous carpentry. You can see the marks left by broad axes that shaped each beam, resulting in surfaces that are smooth yet clearly handmade. Between these wooden beams, the walls are filled with a material called wattle and daub. Imagine thin wooden sticks, perhaps as thick as your thumb, woven together like a giant basket. Then comes the daub, a mixture that might unsettle your stomach. Mud combined with straw, animal hair, and often animal dung, whatever was available. This mixture is plastered over the woven sticks and left to dry into walls that are surprisingly strong and weatherproof. If you were to run your hand along an interior wall, you would feel the rough texture where the mixture was smoothed by hand, sometimes still bearing the imprints of the hands that applied it. These are not the perfect, smooth walls you are used to. They are organic, uneven, and shaped by human hands working with materials provided by the land. The roof above is likely made of thatch, consisting of many layers of dried straw or reeds woven so tightly that water runs off instead of seeping through. Constructing a thatched roof is an art that requires years of learning. The thatcher begins at the bottom and works upward, layering the straw so that each row overlaps the one below. When done correctly, a thatched roof can last for decades, keeping a house completely dry even in the most severe storms. However, a surprising fact about colonial houses is that they typically consist of only 1 or 2 rooms. The house you woke in might be home to a family of 8 or 10 people, parents, children, grandparents, perhaps a servant or 2, all living in a space smaller than many modern bedrooms. Privacy, as you understand it, is non-existent. Everyone sleeps in the same room, shares the same space, and is privy to everyone's business. This lack of privacy extends to a matter that modern people find almost unimaginable: using the bathroom. As you walk around the property, you spot a small wooden structure set back from the house, perhaps 50 or 100 feet away. This is the privy, or outhouse, where every family member addresses their most basic biological needs. The outhouse is essentially a wooden shed built over a deep hole in the ground. Inside, a wooden seat with a hole cut into it sits above a pit that might be 6 or 8 feet deep. There is no toilet paper. That will not be invented for another century. Instead, people use corn cobs, old rags, or smooth stones. In winter, a trip to the outhouse involves bundling up and trudging through snow and ice for what could be a very unpleasant few minutes. But what truly illustrates the difference in lifestyle is what happens when the pit becomes full. Someone has to dig a new one and move the outhouse. Imagine that task on a hot summer day. The waste does not simply vanish, it sits there, fermenting, attracting flies, and creating odors that would sicken a modern person. Because most colonial settlements are built near water sources like streams or wells, this waste often seeps into the ground and contaminates the drinking water. this contamination is one of the leading killers in colonial America. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid fever, and cholera spread rapidly through communities where human waste and drinking water intermingle. You might recall reading about Valley Forge, where George Washington's army endured a terrible winter. What you may not know is that more of his soldiers died from disease than from cold or hunger. Approximately 2/3 of the men who perished at Valley Forge were killed by dysentery and typhoid fever, diseases spread by poor sanitation. At night or during harsh weather, families use chamber pots, ceramic or metal bowls that serve as indoor toilets. Every morning, someone, usually a woman or child, has the task of emptying these pots. And where are they emptied? Often, they are simply dumped out the nearest window. If you were walking down a street in colonial Boston or Philadelphia, you would need to be alert for the cry of Gardy-Loo, a warning that a chamber pot was about to be emptied from an upstairs window. The streets themselves would shock modern sensibilities. There is no garbage collection, street cleaning, or sewage system. People discard their household waste directly into the street. Food scraps, broken pottery, old clothes, and yes, human waste all end up in the roadways. Add to this the droppings from horses, pigs, and other animals that roam freely. When it rains, the streets become impassable rivers of mud and filth. When it is dry, the waste turns to dust that blows everywhere. The smell is something one would have to experience to believe. And this is not confined to poor neighborhoods. Even the wealthiest parts of colonial cities face these same sanitation issues. Given all this, you might assume that people in colonial times were constantly trying to get clean. However, what would astonish a modern person is that most colonists almost never take baths. This is not because they are lazy or indifferent to cleanliness, but because the idea of immersing one's entire body in water is considered dangerous, unhealthy, and possibly immoral. The typical colonial American might wash their face and hands once a day with a cloth and a basin of water. That is the extent of their daily hygiene. Their bodies, from neck to toe, might not be washed with soap and water for months at a time, perhaps not even once a year. Full body bathing is reserved for infants, and even then, it is more about hardening them against disease than about cleanliness. Why this fear of bathing? Part of it stems from the medical beliefs of the time. Many doctors thought that water could weaken the body or make it more susceptible to disease, believing that the natural oils and dirt on the skin actually provided protection from illness. The concept that cleanliness prevents disease, which we take for granted, had not yet been discovered. Religion also played a role. Some religious leaders preached that excessive attention to the body was vanity, and that enduring discomfort was good for the soul. The Puritans, who had a significant influence on colonial culture, valued cleanliness for moral reasons, but they meant clean clothes and tidy homes, not clean bodies. There was also the practical matter of heating water. Remember, every drop had to be carried by hand and heated over a fire. Heating enough water for a bath would take hours and consume vast amounts of precious firewood. For most families, it simply was not worth the effort and expense. So what did people smell like? Essentially, everyone smelled the same, like wood smoke, sweat, and the general scent of unwashed human bodies. Clothes were rarely laundered because soap was expensive, and the process was incredibly labor-intensive. Most people owned only 1 or 2 sets of clothes and wore them until they fell apart. The soap that did exist was nothing like what you are familiar with. Colonial soap was made from animal fat and lye, created by filtering water through wood ashes. The process was hazardous. Lye can burn the skin, and the resulting soap was harsh and caustic. It was used primarily for washing dishes and clothes, not bodies. Using this soap on your skin would leave it red, irritated, and possibly with chemical burns. Women's hair was kept covered almost all the time, partly for religious reasons, and partly because washing hair was nearly impossible. They might brush and rebraid it, but actually washing it with soap and water was a rare event. Men often kept their hair short or shaved their heads and wore wigs instead. Wigs could be cleaned more easily than natural hair, but they also attracted vermin. Lice and other pests were a universal problem. They were simply a part of life, affecting everyone from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest merchant. George Washington himself complained about lice-infested wigs. People tried to control them with fine-toothed combs and by boiling their clothes, but completely eradicating them was nearly impossible in a world without effective cleaning methods. The smell of unwashed human bodies was just background noise in colonial life. When everyone smells the same, the nose stops noticing it, much like how people living near a paper mill cease to smell the sulfur, or how city dwellers tune out traffic noise. Your senses adapt to the norm of your environment, but the consequences of this poor sanitation extended far beyond smells and discomfort. Disease spread rapidly through communities where people lived in close quarters without proper hygiene. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other contagious diseases could decimate entire families or settlements. Medical knowledge was primitive, and there were no antibiotics or vaccines. When someone fell ill, their family could only hope, pray, and try whatever folk remedies they knew. Even minor infections could become life-threatening. A small, dirty cut could lead to blood poisoning. A tooth infection could spread to the brain. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous due to the lack of understanding of germs or sterile conditions. Many women died in childbirth, and survivors often suffered from infections that plagued them for the rest of their lives. The irony is that people in colonial times often lived closer to nature and got more physical exercise than modern people, which should have made them healthier. In some ways, they were typically stronger and more physically capable. But the lack of basic sanitation and medical knowledge meant they died young from diseases that are easily treatable today. Children were especially vulnerable. It was not uncommon for families to lose half their children before they reached adulthood. Parents often delayed naming babies for several months because infant mortality was was so high. Colonial graveyards are filled with tiny headstones marking the graves of children who lived only for days or weeks. Despite these challenges, colonial families developed strategies for dealing with the realities of their time. They burned certain herbs to mask odors and repel insects. They changed their clothes more often than they washed their bodies. They kept their living spaces as clean as possible, even if their bodies were not clean by modern standards. There is also something to be said for the resilience this lifestyle built. People in colonial times had incredibly strong immune systems due to constant exposure to germs and bacteria. Those who survived childhood were often remarkably hardy, able to withstand conditions that would seriously sicken modern people. The community aspect of colonial life also helped people cope with the hardships. When everyone faced the same challenges, a sense of shared struggle brought them together. Neighbors helped each other through illness, shared food during lean times, and provided emotional support during periods of loss. As you stand in this world of pungent, complex smells, you are experiencing a reality that is both harsher and more intimate than anything most modern people can imagine. It is a world where survival depends on community, where physical strength and practical skills are paramount, and where the simple act of staying alive through another day is an achievement worthy of celebration. The sun is climbing higher, and the day's work is calling. It is time to discover what it truly means to earn your living with your hands, and you're back in a world with no shortcuts, no machines to do the work for you, and no safety net if you fail. The workday in colonial America commences the moment you can distinguish your hand before your face, and it concludes only when the last glimmer of light vanishes from the sky. You are about to learn that remaining alive in this era demands a level of physical exertion that would exhaust most modern individuals within hours. Every morsel you consume, every garment you wear, every tool you handle must be fashioned by hand from raw materials, using techniques passed down through generations. Your empty stomach serves as a reminder that the morning's cornmeal mush was merely the start of a day centered around sustenance, cultivating it, preparing it, preserving it, and perpetually worrying if there will be enough to endure the winter. The disparity between a bountiful harvest and a poor one is quite literally the difference between life and death. And this awareness shapes every decision a colonial family makes. If you reside on a farm, as the majority of colonists do, your day is governed by the unending cycle of agricultural labor. In the early morning, you hear the sounds of animals requiring attention. The cow must be milked, a task typically performed by women, though older children may assist. Milking is not the serene process depicted in pastoral paintings. Colonial cows are smaller than modern dairy cows, but also more temperamental, and they yield significantly less milk. The milker sits on a low wooden stool, holding a wooden bucket between her knees, her hands moving in a rhythm learned in childhood. Squeeze, pull, while the cow shifts, stamps, and occasionally attempts to kick. The milk emerges warm and frothy, and sometimes the cow, in a fit of pique, tries to step in the bucket or overturn it. Obtaining a single gallon of milk might require an hour of patient, skilled effort. This milk is a resource of unimaginable value. With no refrigeration, it must be used swiftly or transformed into a product with a longer shelf life. Some of it might be churned into butter, a process involving agitating cream in a wooden churn for what seems like an eternity, until the fat solidifies into butter and separates from the liquid buttermilk. Your arms would ache from the relentless motion of the churn paddle. Some milk is made into cheese, which entails gentle heating, adding an acidic substance like vinegar to induce curdling, and then pressing the curds in cloth to expel the whey. The resulting cheese can be aged in a cool cellar to last through the winter months, when the cow produces less milk, or none at all. The chicken's eggs must be gathered as well, a chore often assigned to children. You would carry a basket and search the chicken coop, carefully reaching under hens that might peck your hand if they feel protective. Colonial chickens are not the plump, docile birds of modern farms. They are smaller, scrappier, and more akin to wild birds, capable of surprising aggression. But the true toil of colonial life takes place in the fields. If you are a man or a boy, you will spend most of your day engaged in agricultural labor that would break the back of someone unaccustomed to it. Plowing a field involves walking behind a wooden plow drawn by oxen or horses, gripping the handles, and maintaining the precise angle needed to slice through the soil. The ground is rough, littered with rocks and roots, causing the plow to jump and jerk, sending shocks up your arms and shoulders. The fields are not neat and flat like modern farms. They are dotted with tree stumps because, while felling trees is one thing, extracting their massive root systems with hand tools is nearly impossible. Farmers plant around the stumps, hoping they will eventually rot. The fields are also strewn with rocks that must be picked up by hand and carried to the edges to build stone walls. This rock picking is an endless task. Each spring, the frost heaves new rocks to the surface. Planting is done by hand, seed by seed. Corn kernels are dropped into holes made with a pointed stick, a few kernels per hole, spaced to prevent competition between plants. Beans might be planted between the corn rows to climb the stalks, while squash grows along the ground between the rows, creating what Native Americans called the Three Sisters, a symbiotic system where all three plants thrive. The work is rhythmic and in some ways mindless, yet it requires constant attention. Plant too shallow, and birds will eat the seeds. Plant too deep, and they will not sprout. Space them incorrectly, and the plants will crowd each other. Every movement must be precise, and this continues for hours under the sun, with sweat stinging your eyes and dirt grinding between your teeth. Weeding the crops is even more tedious. Armed with a hoe, a wooden handle, with a metal blade, you chop out the weeds that grow between the crop plants. This must be done regularly, or the weeds will choke the valuable crops. The work is backbreaking, performed for hours in the summer heat. Harvest time is a period of intense, urgent labor. When the crops are ready, they must be gathered quickly before they spoil or are eaten by animals. Corn is harvested by hand, ear by ear, and then the kernels must be removed from the cobs. This is often a community activity, a corn husking bee, where families gather to work together. People sit in a circle, talking and laughing, while their hands automatically strip kernels from cobs into baskets. Wheat and other grains are cut with hand tools called scythes, which have long wooden handles and curved metal blades. Using a scythe properly is an art that takes years to master. You swing the blade in a smooth arc, cutting the grain stalks near the ground while walking forward at a steady pace. A misstep could mean missing the grain or inflicting a serious injury with the razor-sharp blade. The cut grain is gathered into bundles called sheaves, loaded onto carts, and taken to a barn for thrashing, beating with wooden tools called flails to separate the grain from the stalks. Then, the grain must be winnowed, tossed into the air on a windy day, so the lighter chaff blows away while the heavier grain falls into baskets. Food preservation is a constant concern. Vegetables like turnips and carrots are stored in cool cellars, buried in sand or straw to prevent freezing or rotting. The smokehouse is a small building where meat is hung over smoldering fires for days or weeks. The smoke not only flavors the meat, but also preserves it by driving out moisture and creating chemicals that inhibit spoilage. Tending a smokehouse fire requires skill. Too hot, and the meat cooks too cool, and it spoils. Making salt pork involves packing pieces of pork in barrels with layers of coarse salt, which draws out moisture and creates an environment hostile to bacteria. Salt beef and salt fish are preserved in a similar manner, providing protein when fresh meat is unavailable. While men and boys work in the fields, women and girls have their own exhausting, unending list of tasks. Making clothes begins with growing flax for linen or raising sheep for wool. Flax must be harvested, soaked until it partially rots, then beaten and combed to separate the fibers. Sheep are sheared annually, and their wool must be cleaned, sorted, and prepared for spinning. Spinning thread is a skill that takes years to master. Using a spinning wheel, a woman draws out fibers and twists them into a continuous thread, controlling the thickness and strength with subtle finger movements. A skilled spinner can produce several hundred yards of thread in a day, but it requires hours of concentrated work. The spinning wheel's constant hum is often accompanied by singing or storytelling to pass the time. The thread is then woven into cloth on a loom, a wooden frame that holds the warp threads, while the weaver passes the weft threads back and forth. Operating a loom is like playing a musical instrument, with hands and feet working in complex, rhythmic patterns. But the work is not finished even after the cloth is woven. Wool cloth must be fulled, washed, and beaten to lock the fibers together, creating a denser, warmer fabric. Linen is bleached by laying it in the sun and repeatedly dampening it over weeks. Then, the cloth is cut and sewn into clothes by hand, stitch by tiny stitch. A woman might spend weeks making a single shirt, and every stitch must be strong enough to withstand years of hard use. Cooking is another full-time job, demanding constant attention and skill. Every meal is prepared over an open fire, using heavy iron pots suspended from hooks. Controlling the heat means moving pots, adding logs, and constantly tending the fire. Bread is baked in a stone or brick oven built into the side of the fireplace. A fire is built inside, and once the stones are heated through, the coals are scraped out, and loaves are placed inside to bake in the residual heat. This major production happens once or twice a week, often coordinated with neighbors to share the oven. Other meals involve constant stirring of stews and porridges, careful roasting of meat on hand-turned spits, and managing multiple pots over an unpredictable fire. Burns are a constant danger. Water for cooking and cleaning is carried from a well or stream, bucket by bucket. In winter, this might mean breaking ice and melting it. Laundry is an occasional nightmare, involving heating large quantities of water, scrubbing clothes on washboards with harsh soap, and wringing them out by hand. The rhythm of colonial work follows the seasons and the daylight. In summer, people work up to 16 hours a day. In winter, they work from dawn until dusk, and the evenings are spent on indoor tasks like mending clothes or repairing tools. Children begin working as soon as they are able. Boys help their fathers with farming and learn a trade, while girls assist their mothers with household tasks, learning the skills needed to run their own homes. Leisure time, as we understand, it does not exist. The physical toll of this lifestyle is immense. Hands are permanently stained and scarred. Backs ache from bending over crops and looms, and feet are tough and calloused. But the people are also incredibly strong and capable, able to perform tasks that would seem magical to someone from the modern world. By evening, as the last light fades, you have worked harder than most modern people do in a week. Your body is exhausted, your clothes are dirty, and you smell of wood smoke and honest labor. But you have also contributed something essential to your family's survival, and that deep satisfaction helps ease the ache in your muscles as you finally rest. After a day of backbreaking labor, you might think all colonists lived the same hard life, but colonial America was a world divided into distinct social classes, each with its own daily rhythms and relationship to comfort and survival. Where you stood in this social order determined everything. If you were fortunate enough to be born into the upper class, the wealthy gentry, your morning began very differently. Instead of rushing to milk cows, you would awaken in a bedroom with actual glass windows, admitting soft, filtered light. Your bed would be a proper wooden bedstead with a feather or down mattress, and fine linen sheets, smooth against your skin. A servant, either indentured or enslaved, would help you dress in clothes made from imported fabrics, cut by skilled tailors. A wealthy man's attire might include a linen shirt with delicate ruffles, a silk waistcoat, and silk stockings. A wealthy woman's gown would be made of expensive materials like silk or fine wool from England, in rich colors like deep indigo blue or vibrant cochineal red. Both men and women often wore wigs of human hair, carefully styled and powdered, expensive status symbols that required professional care. The wealthy colonial's breakfast was a world away from cornmeal mush. There might be real tea from China, served in delicate porcelain cups, or coffee, another luxury import, served with refined white sugar. The food would include fresh bread from wheat flour, eggs, and preserved meats like bacon or ham. The wealthy did not cook. Servants or enslaved people tended the fires and prepared the meals in a separate kitchen building to keep smells and fire hazards away from the main house. These wealthy colonists lived in houses with multiple rooms, each with a specific purpose: a parlor for entertaining, a dining room, separate bedrooms, and perhaps even a library. The rooms had polished wooden floors, plastered walls, and elegant furniture. But wealth did not mean comfort by modern standards. Even the richest colonists lived without electricity, indoor plumbing, or central heating. They relied on fireplaces for heat and candles for light, ate with their hands or simple utensils, and their houses were still cold in winter and stuffy in summer. The middle class, or the middling sort, included merchants, skilled craftsmen, successful farmers, and professionals like doctors and lawyers. These people worked with their hands, but their work required skill and education. A blacksmith, for example, worked in the intense heat of a forge, shaping red-hot iron into horseshoes, nails, and tools with heavy hammers. The rhythm of blacksmithing was hypnotic. The roar of the bellows, the ring of hammer on anvil, the hiss of hot metal plunged into water. Carpenters and cabinet makers used hand tools with incredible skill, creating precise joints that fit together perfectly without nails or screws. These skilled craftsmen often lived above or behind their workshops in houses that were well made but not fancy, with adequate food and sturdy, practical clothes. City life in colonial America offered opportunities not found in rural areas, but also brought its own challenges. In cities like Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, you would awaken to the sound of church bells, cartwheels on cobblestone streets, and the calls of street vendors. The streets were narrow, crowded, and often impassable in bad weather. Houses were built close together, and the smells and sounds of your neighbors were inescapable. But cities also had conveniences, shops where you could buy goods instead of making everything yourself. A baker sold fresh bread daily, a tailor could make clothes to order, and an apothecary sold medicines and exotic spices. Taverns were the social centers of colonial cities, where business was conducted, news was shared, and travelers found lodging. They were filled with the smell of pipe tobacco, cooking food, and unwashed bodies, and the sound of conversation, laughter, and music. Colonial Americans drank alcoholic beverages with every meal, including breakfast, because alcohol was often safer than the contaminated water in cities. Even children drank small beer, a weak alcoholic drink less likely to carry disease. Education was a privilege, not a right. The sons of the wealthy attended colleges like Harvard or William and Mary. Middle-class children might attend dame schools, informal schools run by women in their homes, where they learned basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. Poor children, especially in rural areas, often received no formal education at all, learning only the practical skills needed for survival. The Bible was often the only book in a household, and children learned to read by studying its verses. Religious life dominated colonial society. Sunday was a day of mandatory church attendance, with services that could last for hours. The minister preached about sin, salvation, and the struggle between good and evil. But church was also a community gathering, a place to share news, conduct business, and maintain social connections. The Puritan belief that hard work was a form of worship helped colonists endure their difficult lives. Colonial communities organized themselves around shared work and mutual aid. Barn raisings brought men together to build a new barn in a single day. Quilting bees were social events where women gathered to create quilts, their conversation and laughter filling the room as they worked. Corn husking bees turned tedious work into a social occasion with music, dancing, and food. Harvest time brought communities together as neighbors helped each other gather their crops, knowing they would need the same help in return. The three colonial regions, New England, the Middle Colonies, and the South, developed distinct cultures. New England, with its rocky soil and harsh winters, had a culture based on small farms and fishing. The fertile Middle Colonies became the breadbasket of colonial America. The South developed a plantation system based on cash crops like tobacco and rice. But despite these differences, all colonists shared the challenge of creating a new society in a wilderness. As darkness fell, the social distinctions of the day seemed to fade. Rich or poor, city dweller or farmer, everyone faced the same basic needs for warmth, food, shelter, and companionship, gathered around the flickering light of a fire. As winter descended upon your colonial community, the stark realities of life intensified, alongside the remarkable ways people adapted and even found joy. This was the season that most clearly revealed the fragility of colonial existence, when a minor illness could become a death sentence, and staying warm a daily battle. The urgent task was preparing for the months when the world outside turned hostile. You could feel the sharp bite in the air, a warning of the coming frost. Every family's survival depended on the food they had harvested and preserved. Root vegetables were stored in cellars carved into hillsides or dug beneath houses, insulated with earth and straw. The apple harvest was a time of both celebration and arduous labor. Apples were pressed into cider, a crucial method of preserving their calories and nutrition. The natural yeasts on the apple skins fermented the juice into alcoholic cider, which kept longer than fresh juice and was often safer to drink than water. Colonial families drank cider with every meal, even children consuming watered-down versions. Despite these preparations, disaster could strike in uncontrollable forms. Disease spread easily in crowded, poorly ventilated houses. Medical knowledge was a strange mix of folk wisdom and flawed theories. Families relied on herbal remedies, some of which, like willow bark, a source of aspirin-like compounds, were effective, though they did not understand why. Trained doctors often subscribed to the theory of the four humors, believing illness stemmed from an imbalance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatments like bloodletting, where a vein was cut to release excess blood, and purging often weakened patients further. Dental care was primitive and brutal. A toothache, a common affliction, usually meant a visit to a barber or blacksmith for an extraction. With no anesthesia besides alcohol or opium, the patient would endure excruciating pain as the tooth was pulled with metal pliers, often breaking and leaving infected fragments behind. George Washington suffered from severe dental problems, and his famous false teeth were not made of wood, but from a combination of metal, ivory, and human and animal teeth. For most, dental care meant enduring pain until teeth fell out or had to be removed. Infection was a constant danger. A small cut could lead to fatal blood poisoning. Childbirth was perilous for both mother and baby. Midwives, experienced but with no knowledge of germs, attended births, unknowingly spreading infections. Infant mortality was heartbreakingly high. Families often lost half their children before adulthood, and cemeteries were filled with the tiny headstones of infants who lived only briefly. This constant proximity to death fostered a deeply religious and fatalistic culture. People believed life and death were in God's hands, which helped them cope with unimaginable tragedy. Yet, life was not all hardship. Winter evenings, with their early darkness, became times for storytelling, music, and simple entertainment. Families gathered by the fire to share folk tales from Europe, local stories, or Bible passages. Music was a constant presence, played on simple, homemade instruments like fiddles and wooden flutes. Singing was free entertainment for all. Children created their own fun from whatever was available. A piece of wood became a doll, stones a game, and a length of string a whirligig. Girls practiced adult skills with miniature tools, turning play into training for their future roles. Seasonal celebrations provided breaks from the constant work. Harvest festivals celebrated the year's agricultural success with the best food the community could offer. Christmas was a quieter, more religious holiday. Spring brought celebrations of renewal and hope. The first green shoots a cause for genuine joy after months of preserved food. As the 18th century progressed, political news from across the ocean began to seep into daily life. The relationship between the American colonies and Great Britain grew strained over issues of taxation and control. To pay off war debts, the British government imposed new taxes: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, on everything from molasses to paper to tea. Colonists, who had no representation in Parliament, protested that this was taxation without representation. British policies favored trade with England, hurting local merchants and craftsmen. A growing sense of American identity emerged. Colonists born in America, whose parents and grandparents were also born there, began to see themselves as Americans rather than British subjects. The Boston Tea Party of 1773 was the culmination of years of resentment. Britain's punitive response, the Intolerable Acts, convinced many colonists that fair treatment was no longer possible. As tensions escalated, daily life began to change. Women organized boycotts of British goods, reviving domestic production of cloth and other items. Men formed militia units, calling themselves Minutemen, ready to fight at a moment's notice. The skills colonists had developed through generations of hard living, self-reliance, problem-solving, endurance, and strong community bonds were precisely what they needed to fight for independence. When the revolution came, it brought new hardships, but also new hope. The soldiers who endured the brutal winter at Valley Forge were colonial farmers and craftsmen who knew how to withstand cold and hunger. The women who supported the war effort were already skilled at managing households without imported goods. As you drift off to sleep in your colonial bed, the fire dwindling to embers, you are experiencing the end of an era. The world of handmade everything, of lives shaped by seasons and survival, is about to be transformed by revolution. But the character traits forged in this experience, self-reliance, a strong work ethic, community responsibility, will become part of the American character. The people sleeping around you have already accomplished something remarkable. They have turned a wilderness into communities and created a new society. In just a few years, these same people will create a new nation based on the radical idea that governments should serve the people. Their daily experiences, the need to cooperate, the rewards of hard work, the dangers of distant, concentrated power, have prepared them for this revolutionary experiment. As you close your eyes, remember that you have spent a day in the lives of people who were, quietly and unknowingly, preparing to change the world. Their struggles, their daily acts of cooperation, and their gradual development of a distinctly American way of life were all building towards something extraordinary. A new nation founded on everything they had learned about life, work, community, and the quiet dignity of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.